ठीक है।
Swami Nityanamani Namaste Saraswati Devi Golavana Pacharane Shri Pashtarane Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Gaur Bhakta Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare. So in Bhagavad Gita we speak about the Atma or the soul, and we cannot prove that according to science. At the same time, it is the basis, one of the basis of our movement, our philosophy. Nevertheless, in the modern world, most people are trained up to give more respect to science than to scripture. So then people are not likely to accept the fact that we say, well, it's in scripture, so therefore you have to believe it. So this gives a little bit of a problem, how people get faith in scripture in the modern world. So, of course, science itself, we have to examine what science is. And science as we know it is quite recent. It's been there for a few hundred years. The Vedas have been there for thousands of years, and modern science has been there for a few hundred years only. And before that, whatever they did, you couldn't call that science. So it's something quite modern. However, if we look at these scientists that came out in the, let's say after the 1600s or whatever, Europe, we have persons like Newton. So Newton his laws are like studied in all textbooks. It's like he's one of the most revered persons, and all of science was actually based on Newton's theories up until 1900, I think. So we call this Newtonian science, Newtonian physics, whatever like that. So it's the basis of everything for like 300 or 400 years. Then, of course, something else came along, Einstein came along, and that was finished. And then we said, well, Newton's not quite correct anymore. So, but up until the Newton was like a master. And so he was a scientist, but actually, he also believed in God, of all things. He believed in other strange things also. One of the things is he believed in a God. Of course, maybe not a God with a form like Krishna or that. Nevertheless, he did believe in some sort of a God. Because when he investigated science, he saw that the natural world was governed by laws. And the laws acted very harmoniously somehow or other. But how could that be? If everything is random, there should be no laws. So when he saw how the planets were moving, etc., then he thought there must be an intelligent being behind this. And that's the type of logic. Of course, modern world, one can find fault with that logic, but it's a common type of logic, and I think we also use that. So we will say that if we see a painting, a famous painting, and then we know, okay, some artist painted it. Yeah? And it took them some time to do it. It wasn't just an accident. Yeah? On the other hand, if you get some paints, all the same paints that they use to make that picture, and you stick them on a line like this, and then you put a piece of canvas there, and then you wait. Let's by chance make a painting. How long are you going to wait? 2 million years? Still, you're not going to get that picture coming out like the artist made. So therefore he said, you know, in nature itself is like the painting. And the things operate like that. So how is it possible that we say it's all by chance? Huh? And the same goes even for like evolutional theory. According to that, everything is chance. But if you let chance happen like that, you're not going to get cells, you're not going to get living forms, you're not going to get animals. It won't happen by chance. You can leave them there forever, nothing's going to happen. So, therefore, there's certain things which are questionable in science based on this idea that, you know, there's a plan there must be an intelligence behind it. So anyway, that was his idea. He had some idea like that. But then from the 17th century onwards, people got more rational and more rational. And at the same time, there was this tension between church and science. And it started because the church was repressing the science, and every time they said something, then the church would burn them at the stake or do something to kill them and throw them in prison, torture them or whatever. Say you're a heretic. If you say that, you know, the moon goes around the earth, then you're a heretic. If you say that the moon is a globe, you're a heretic. So that they would, you know, crucify you or burn you at the stake or do something to you. So the scientists were, you know, afraid of the church at one time. But then, gradually, the science got stronger and stronger and stronger. And religion got weaker and weaker and weaker. So, but the tension was always there. Right? So it wasn't a friendly relationship between the scientists and the priests of the church. So gradually, science got stronger and stronger, and the church got weaker and weaker, until the people, the public, they supported the science, and they said, yeah, it's true, because what they say, you know, they do things, they do experiments, and it's true. So why we should believe the church anymore? What they say is false. Who will believe science? So the public also began to support science over church. And therefore, science became the way in which you could find truth. Of course, it doesn't claim that, but then people think of it because they give you answers to, you know, physical questions like, you know, the speed of a ball falling or whatever like that, the force of an object, etc. So based on that, then they say they must know everything about everything. So that's a false faith, but people are like that. So anyway, people develop more and more faith in science as a result. Right. So on the way, we also come up with Darwin. He didn't quite say that there was no God. He just said we could not prove one way or the other, which is also intelligent because that's so. We cannot prove or disprove according to science. So he didn't say there is no God. He can't even say that. All he can say is we don't know. So of course he is famous for Darwin's theory, this theory of evolution, which is very atheistic. Everything happens by chance, etc. But then he also says the mystery of the beginning of all things is insoluble by us, and I, for one, must be content to remain an agnostic. Now, of course, even in his theory, when he made his theory of evolution, there were certain things he could not explain, according to the idea that things evolve by chance and mutation. So he could not explain how the eye evolved from no eye to an eye. How could it do that as a matter of survival or whatever, by change? It's impossible to explain. And many things are impossible to explain in the body, and the more we discover about, you know, how the body works in the cells, it's very difficult to explain evolution according to that. So there was some things he knew were insoluble, he couldn't explain really, so that's why he took this position of being agnostic. I can't say one way or the other. In the modern world, we have persons who, even though they're not religious, they also admit that science cannot solve all the problems. It doesn't have the answers to everything. So there are certain areas which science should not try to explain or give answers to. So some scientists are cautious in this thing, like H. Alan Moore. So Einstein was the big scientist who came up a century ago, and his discoveries and theories changed everything because they contradicted Newton. And all science was based on Newton before that. And then suddenly he comes along and everything changes. So, and based on his, of course, we got atomic theory and atomic energy, and E equals MC squared, and all things like that, relativity theory, and quantum physics. So all this came about through Einstein. That's a very, very foundational character, personality for modern science. And then again, he also would not declare no God. He said agnostic. We don't know. Cannot say one way or the other. So again, he's playing it safe. But then, and on the other hand, though he says agnostic in this particular quote, he tends to think of some sort of God, even though it may not be personal, but some sort of God. This firm belief, a belief bound up with a deep feeling in a superior mind that reveals itself in the world of experience, represents my conception of God. In common parlance, this may be described as pantheistic or whatever. So some respect for some higher organizing power behind things. We won't give a name to it. The most beautiful emotion we can experience is the mystical. It is the power of all true art and science. He to whom this emotion is a stranger, who can no longer wonder and stand wrapped in awe, is as good as dead. In this sense, and in this sense only, I belong to the rank of devotedly religious men. So he's not all cold science, in other words. He does give some respect for the workings of the universe that he can't understand. And quantum mechanics is very worthy of regard, but an inner voice tells me that this is not yet the right track. The theory yields much, but it hardly brings us closer to the old one's secret. I, in any case, am convinced that he does not play dice. So again, there's a little bit of a tendency to think that there is something beyond chance in this universe. So he mentions quantum physics here. This is an interesting theory. So before that, we have science and knowledge, in which we observe objects which are real, and they're quite separate from the observer. I look at something, I'm here, the object is here. In quantum physics, waves or particles, which are two very different things, don't exist until you look at them and you observe them. Which is a funny type of existence. It doesn't exist until we look at it. And when we don't look at it, it disappears. It doesn't exist. How can that be? And if you want to look at it like a wave, it will be like a wave. 10 minutes later, you test it as a particle, it becomes a particle. How can it do that? How can matter be one thing or the other? Because they're contradictory. To say something is black and white doesn't make any sense. It's one or the other. So wave and particle are two different things. But yet something that behaves as a wave, but then it behaves as a particle. When you test it each way, it behaves like that. How can it be? Since, of course, it's combined or very low level subatomic, when you deal with electrons and things like that. But nevertheless, it's mysterious how things can be one way and change into something else. Energy is changing. But how? By looking at it. So that's very strange, how our consciousness is related to matter. But nobody thought like that before, that it was possible. Matter is just matter. But matter changes according to your cosmos. So that's quantum physics, very puzzling. Since they discovered this strange phenomenon, they've been trying to explain it, and they've been trying to explain it for 100 years, and they haven't explained it. So this is science, they don't know. So someone comes up with a theory, and then someone will come along with it, and they will defeat the theory. It's not incorrect, this fault, that fault, whatever. Somebody else comes up with a theory, somebody else defeats that theory. And this has been going on for 100 years. They propose a theory, it gets rejected. New theory, rejected. It's been going on like that. So in other words, the science does not have the answer to all questions. So anyway, this is the wave and particle thing. So the top one is the wave. A wave just goes one way, it goes another way. It goes to the left or goes to the right, and then you can record how that particle of light is recorded on a plate or whatever like that. But then if you want to test it as a wave, waves are kind of like this, not little particles. It's just like a massive thing, like a wave in the water. And it will go through the slits, both slits. See, there's two little slits there. So a particle will go through first slit or second slit, one or the other. That's a particle. And if you test it as a particle, it will act like that. So it'll go left or it'll go right. It won't go through both. But you test it as a wave, it goes through both, and then it leaves a pattern, a ripple pattern on the plate. So how can the electron do that? How can it act one way or the other? But it does, according to how you test it. So it's unexplainable. So until 2011, we have the atoms, 430 compounds, atoms combining together, and also depended upon how the observer saw them. It wasn't just particles, but you could get combinations. So it's bigger than small particles. And they also found it, they changed like this, particle, whatever, according to how you observe them. So then the conclusion is that at least for small particles, reality is determined by the person who sees it, by your consciousness. It sounds strange, just like it's all a dream or something, because you determine what reality is when you look at it. That's the conclusion here. For small particles, not for big things, but for small things. And so this means that the observer, which we can call the mind, and we can also call the soul, who determines reality, must be real. The observer must be real also. So the person who's observing this thing, who changes the reality one way or the other, must be real. So that means that observer, the mind, or the soul must be real. So that's maybe a scientific proof that Allah exists, something like that. Or mind exists at least, consciousness exists, whatever we want to call it, that exists. Before this point, consciousness was nothing. It was just a byproduct of the brainwaves, and kind of something, they don't know what it is, but it wasn't anything substantial, it wasn't real. But due to quantum physics, then you have to say mind is real, because it determines reality itself, wave, particle, etc. Interesting. So, some scientists, they're thoughtful persons, and then they begin to think, okay, what is this new science, and then observer, and this. So they get a little spiritual, and they begin to think about, okay, maybe there is a conscious entity, consciousness is real, maybe there's a soul, and things like this. But of course it goes off a little bit, and they have all sorts of strange theories. So here we have the physicist, Penrose, very famous physicist. So then he developed this theory of consciousness, quantum theory of consciousness, that inside your brain there's little microtubules within our brain cells like that, and somehow the soul is in there, some far-out theory like that. And the brain is like a big computer with all these neurons, and and somewhere in there, there's this soul who's connected with the neurons, some theory. That information there with that so-called particle of consciousness doesn't get destroyed. It kind of pervades everything. And if your body is destroyed, then it doesn't get destroyed, but maybe it emerges somewhere in the universe, we don't know. And if you have a near-death experience, you come back to your body after you so-called die, then that consciousness goes back in and goes back into the microtubules in your brain again. So that's their theory. And if you die, then of course the whole information goes out, so your soul could exist outside the body. Anyway, this is one theory. So at least they're accepting some sort of thing apart from gross matter. So this German Mr. Duer, Dr. Duer, well, we consider the here and now, this world is actually just the material level that is comprehensible. The beyond is an infinite reality that is much bigger. So in other words, he's realizing that what we know in science of what is real and what is the universe, etc., is not everything. There's something greater there that we don't know about. So this admits we don't have all knowledge. In this way, our lives in this plane of existence are encompassed, surrounded by the afterworld already. When planning, I imagine that I have written my existence in this world on a sort of hard drive on the tangible, the brain, that I've also transferred this data onto the spiritual quantum field. And then they could say that when I die, I do not lose this information as consciousness. The body dies, but the spiritual quantum field continues. In this way, I am immortal. So in other words, he says I'm the soul, but he calls it quantum field. That's what we call the soul. So anyway, getting a little spiritual. David Bohm, of course, he's a little more mystical, whatever, a friend of Einstein. The result of modern natural sciences only makes sense if we assume an inner, uniform, transcendent reality that is based on all external data and facts. The very depth of human consciousness is one of them. And so he's saying there's something beyond the gross matter or whatever. So consciousness is something that really exists, and it's also uniting with other people's consciousness, so it's a little bit different from normal matter. This is one comment by a nuclear physicist. Many scientists who are still part of the scientific mainstream are no longer afraid to openly state that consciousness, awareness, could, in addition to space, time, matter, and energy, be a fundamental element of the world, perhaps even more fundamental than space and time. It may be a mistake to ban the spirit from nature. So there is an admission here also that, beyond normal discussions, we should put consciousness into our study as well, not just space-time, energy, and matter. So, a little progress there, even in science. All the stars, planets, and galaxies that can be seen today make up just 4% of the universe. That's, of course, we don't know for sure, but they'll admit that. 4%, what we conceive of the universe. The other 96% is made of stuff astronomers can't see, to detect, or even comprehend. According to their own theory, there's something there that we don't know about. So this is the 4%. Protons, neurons, electrons, quarks, and gluons, which I don't even know what they are. We studied protons, neurons, and electrons, but what about quarks and gluons? We didn't know about those when I studied in college. But that's the 4% of the universe. And when you talk about galaxies and structure of the universe, we're talking about this. But then there's the rest of it. 23% dark matter and 70% dark energy, all of which we don't know about. So this is how much science knows at the moment, 4% of something. This is, whole universe. So we don't know everything in science.
So in science we have forces and fields like gravitational fields, electromagnetic fields, all very subtle things as well. Like this is all these energies, etc. But a large amount of things we don't know about. So if we go to the Bhagavatam, we get a little more, it's not so vague, but of course it's quite different when we talk about matter. Of course we have some things which are not matter, but they're also material ones, that they're not conscious and they belong to the material world, not to the spiritual realm. That is time and karma. It's not substance at all, but it's something there which is material. It doesn't belong to the spiritual realm. And then we get the matter part of it, which we call prakriti. But this prakriti is something very subtle, which science also cannot detect. Maybe that's the dark matter, the prakriti and the mahatattva or something like that. You can't detect prakriti at all, but it is matter. Yeah? Its first detectable form is mahatattva, when the jiva enters into it and then glows as if it's pure consciousness. Yeah? So it's detectable, that mahatattva. And then we get these subtle elements of ahankara, mind, senses, and sense objects, all very subtle, you can't see them. And then you get the gross matter, air, ether, fire, water, earth. But even these ones you cannot see. Only when these combine in certain proportions, ether combines with air, fire, water, and earth, or earth combines with water, fire, air, ether, then they become the visible things we see in this world. Apart, when they're all separate, like ether is ether, or air is air, you can't see that also. So maybe that's also the invisible universe they're talking about, uncombined elements. Oh. If you had a body of pure earth, you wouldn't be visible. So this whole analysis is in the Bhagavatam, but it's in common with the Sankhya philosophy of Kapila Deva. He likes to analyze all the things like that. So you get all the classification of things here. All elements which you can't even see. It's only when they combine together the visible world that we know it comes about. So apart from that, we got the non-material components, versus time and karma, etc., very subtle aspects of the material world. But beyond that, we get the Atma, the number of Atmas you can't even count. They're conscious particles, they have an identity of their own, they're a knower, they're a doer, they're an experiencer. There's a Jata, Karta, and Bhokta. So these are the jivas. So these are the conscious elements. So when science talks about quantum theory and the observer, then this is the Atma, the knower. He's the one that's looking at all of this. And then we have another entity, the witness, the knower, that's Supreme Lord. So he's the supreme knower of everything, the supreme witness of everything. Independent, nobody above him. He's the supreme doer, the supreme controller, the supreme enjoyer, the supreme everything. He's like the jiva, but he's in the supreme position. And he's the one that unites the jivas and matter, everything together by his knowledge and his power. So that's why everything operates in a very harmonious way, because of him. So where do they get the knowledge from? We go to scriptures, not by the observation or not by your logical thought process. So science, as we know, that's what Newton after that, was all based on observation, eyes, etc., and logic. And they could develop to some degree like that. And they were very excited in doing that, making new discoveries all the time until the 20th century. Yeah? Then they got this theory of the quantum thing and they can't figure out what this is, and then they said there must be consciousness. Then they don't have any rules for that. They have no way of observing it. They don't know what the rules are to govern it, so they can't really discuss it at all. But they know it exists, so that's beyond their knowledge. So how do we know about consciousness? We have to go to the scripture. That's all we can do. Yeah? And long before, we know that this is the conclusion that has come about. Yes, there's a body, but then there is the Atma behind the body. That's the conscious entity. Completely different. Huh? So, not only do scriptures describe this Atma, but they also give it a purpose, which is more important. Just to say you're not the body, you're the Atma, fine, but then what does the Atma do, or why is it here, etc. That should be explained also. So this is another significant aspect of the scripture, not only identifying the Atma as a real thing, but also that it does have a purpose. So, therefore, the purpose of the Atma is to get rid of ignorance and to develop knowledge. So, this is, of course, explained very simply in the Bhagavad Gita. The distinction of Atma from body is a very elementary teaching of the Bhagavad Gita. First teaching, actually. Second chapter, when Arjuna says, I'm confused, I don't know what to do. That this is the first teaching that Krishna gives Arjuna. You're not the body, you're the Atma. So a very, very basic teaching. But it's something that science hasn't, they're just struggling with at the moment now. They didn't start with that with Newton. They're coming out in the 20th century and they're forced to kind of accept something like an Atma after, 400 years. But this is like the preliminary thing in the Bhagavad Gita. You're not the body, you're the soul. Chapter 2, not chapter 18. So interesting. But we'll find this is quite significant because most religions also, they can't really distinguish between soul and body or whatever. How do they exist? They have no real conception about the soul. But we'll find a very definite distinction of soul from body in the Bhagavad Gita. So therefore this eternal self or the Atma is there. The body is born and dies, but the soul does not. So you're eternal. Yeah? So this is repeated over and over in the second chapter in many ways. Yeah. The problem with this is that though we get the information, even if we have the information and we accept it, it is very difficult to be fixed in that conception. I'm not the body, I'm the soul. We keep going back to the body because we're using our senses, and when we're conscious, we're looking out in this world, and then we have our hankara behind, which makes us identify with the body. So it's very difficult to give up our conditioning and our ignorance. The souls and the mind and intelligence, false ego, they gravitate towards ignorance, and they keep covering up the soul, in spite of the fact that the scriptures say you're not the body, you're the soul, you're the Atma. So, of course, if we don't have scripture, then we don't know anything. At least if we have scripture, theoretically, we know, yes, I am the soul, I'm not the body. Others are in a hopeless position. And this is the whole description of the Atma, the soul in the chariot of the body, and the senses are wild horses pulling the chariot here and there. So in other words, you're at the mercy of your mind and your senses and your intelligence and your false ego, all pushing you away from realizing Atma. So a very pitiful condition. And this is of course explained in the Bhagavad Gita. For the person who meditates on the senses, obviously attachment arises. From attachment arises desire. From desire arises anger. From anger arises bewilderment. From bewilderment comes loss of memory. From loss of memory comes loss of intelligence. And loss of intelligence comes destroyed. So what this means is that the intelligence and the memory, etc., means you don't even listen to previous experience or previous knowledge or scripture at all. You just act according to your immediate desire. And then you commit sinful activity, then you get bad karma. And then you get animal body, and you sink down in lower species of life. So this is what happens in the material world when we have no idea that we're in the body. We just get sucked into this enjoyment mode with the senses. Okay? Of course, all day long, because we are in the body and we're supporting the body, then generally all of our actions are governed by the idea that we have to support our body. So our mind and our desires turn into action. The action is there to get things to support our body, and then this is good, I get some nice enjoyment out of this, goes into the mind, develop new desires, do new actions like this. So repeatedly, we're going through this cycle all day long of getting sense information, acting upon it, so that we get some comfort of the body, all under ignorance. So this becomes a big cycle.
in which we have impressions in mind and desire and greed and anger and hatred and action. Impressions goes into the mind and we develop new desires, etc. It's a continual cycle that goes on. And what this does, of course, is it pushes us into another body because we get karma. And then in each body, we do more karmas, we get pushed into another body. And it all looks very haphazard from body to body. So there's the wheel of karma. This is the Buddhist rendition. And the big monster up top there, the red thing, that's time. Kala, with the skulls on his head. And then the circle is the wheel of karma. And there are 6 divisions in the wheel of karma here, representing different species you can become. You can become a human, you can go to heaven, become a devata, you can become a demon or rakshasa, you can become an animal, you can go to hell, you can become a ghost. Of course, there's more things. You can become a plant or a bacteria or anything, but these are 6 things in this spokes here. Like this. In the center, there's a chicken and a snake and a pig. There, you can't see it very well. So those little animals represent lust, anger, and greed, as we saw over here. Greed, anger, lust, etc. Desire, greed, anger. So they're pushing the wheel around. Lust, anger, greed, action, 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 karma, 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 and you go from body to body that way. So, the scriptures realize that it's difficult to get out of this cycle of birth and death and to control desire, etc. But the scriptures try to advise us what to do. So they give us instructions, they give us rules to follow. Do this, don't do that. This is all to counteract that ignorance and doing activities which push us into another life, in that cycle of birth and death. So, at the bottom level, we have karma yoga. So this is the basic system of rules and regulations for sense control. What you can do and what you cannot do. And you follow these, then you avoid sinking down into lower species of life. And then you can raise yourself upwards. We saw in this cycle here, you can go to heaven. So you follow the rules of karma yoga, you can get the heavenly body. You don't follow the rules, then you get the animal body or the demon body or the hellish body, etc. So the karma yoga and varnashram system, dharma, etc., they will help us maintain our level and progress upwards, birth after birth. In that sense, it's positive. It gives us less suffering and more enjoyment. But that enjoyment is also restricted. You cannot, if you start enjoying unrestrictedly, then you go down again. So it's always restriction here, rules and regulations. If you rise up to sattva gun, then you're on the level of a little bit of spiritual life. So you can realize Atma. So then you can practice Jnana Yoga, knowledge of Atma. And so in sattva gun, then you have a natural tendency to appreciate and realize Atma. So you're qualified for Jnana Yoga. And therefore you can start philosophical inquiry by study of Vedanta and performing austerities. Or you can go into Ashtanga Yoga and practice that in order to realize Atma through pranayama and asanas and meditation, etc. But as we see from Bhagavad Gita, after discussing these things up to chapter 6, then Krishna finally says the best thing to do is bhakti yoga. And from chapter 6 to chapter 12, then Krishna discusses only bhakti yoga. So this is the process of getting beyond this cycle of birth and death. The other processes are preliminary. This is the easy way to get beyond birth and death. So in this process, there's a little addition. It's not just body and then realization of Atma. It's also acceptance and realization of Bhagavan, Supreme Lord. So we have an additional spiritual element here, not just the Atma. So this makes it superior. Because by worshiping the Supreme Lord, we can get help to advance. If we're just Atma,
there's no help from the Supreme Lord. When we get the Supreme Lord in the picture, then we get his help. Additionally, we don't have to renounce, as we have to renounce here, do austerities or whatever, as yogis or whatever. Instead, we simply engage our senses. And therefore, the emphasis is not upon renunciation and living in caves in the Himalayas. It is living anywhere and hearing, chanting, remembering, serving the Lord, etc., using our senses. So it doesn't require intense renunciation or austerity. Okay? So we have these processes in Scripture to help us, and of course through Jnana and yoga we can realize not the body of the Atma. Through Bhakti Yoga we can also realize Atma, but more than that we can also realize Supreme Lord. So Bhakti gives us more complete spiritual knowledge than Jnana or yoga. So this is Scripture. Still people say, well, how can we believe that or whatever? So science cannot directly prove Atma or Supreme Lord because Atma is spiritual and it's not subject to material tests or observation. You cannot see the Atma with your eye as you cannot see the Lord with your eye because we have material eyes. So the spirit is not subject to material perception. So you can never prove by observation under a microscope or whatever, or radiating energy out like this or whatever. You can never see the Atma that way. So that way science cannot prove anything about Atma. So difficult. But some people have tried this way. I think they tried weighing the body when it's alive and then weighing the body when it's dead and seeing the difference, and then the difference with the weight of the Atma or something like that. But that's not necessary. So it could be your pranas leaving, your subtle body leaving, and not necessarily the soul, because the soul doesn't have any weight actually. But of course, they're getting a little, progressive, at least at the subtle body, and relate that to the soul. There's something, a little admission at least, even though it's not spiritual. But anyway, that's difficult to prove through scientific methodology, because it does depend upon our observation. We cannot see the soul at all. However, there's some indirect ways. Maybe we've discussed this already, but anyway. So one is with Dr. Ian Stevenson, where he investigated cases of children who remembered a previous lifetime. And he's an atheistic scientist. He was interested in the psychological nature of children and why they get these strange stories in their head. But then after he studied all these children, they said it's not stories, that it's true. What they're saying is true, they have memories, and it's memories of a previous life that did exist. So then he understood the soul is in one body with its experiences, and then it goes into another body, and it retains the memory. That's the only way he could explain it. The memory is from a previous body in which that soul existed. That's how he explained it. So therefore, a rational person can believe in reincarnation, which goes from body to body, soul goes from body to body, on the basis of evidence. Of course, evidence is testimony of 2,600 children. So one can challenge that, well, we don't want to believe children or whatever, or it's only, they say that, but how can we believe it? So in that sense, they have these memories, but no one can prove they're true or not true ultimately. But through his scientific investigation and weeding out any cheating or whatever like that, this was his conclusion. So it's indirect, but nevertheless there. So therefore, he concluded that there are two streams of evolution: the biological one and the personal ones. Maybe Darwin's theory, bodies are evolving, but actually there's another thing there. That's the soul, which is having more and more experiences life after life. So this way, we go from body to body. And we go there, body to body, eternally. And in the course of his work, also, he discovered an interesting thing, which is also stated in the Bhagavad Gita: whatever you remember when you quit your body, you attain that. So, example is, he remembered a deer, he became a deer. So that, of course, is very difficult to prove scientifically. But then, Ian Stevenson kind of proved it. So, the children remembered previous lifetime. Many of them, they had a rather tragic death. And the experience of that death left marks on their body. which got imprinted into their next body. And they didn't become a deer by remembering a deer, but at least the marks, the wound marks of their death got imprinted into the next body. So here's the bullet hole marks of a man that was shot previous lifetime. Next lifetime, a small boy, he remembered that previous lifetime, a village 100 kilometers away or whatever. He remembered his parents and family and house, etc. And then he remembered how he died. Somebody shot him with a shotgun. Shotgun has many bullets in it. So later the policemen, they took his body and they did the autopsy, and they had the drawing of the autopsy with the wounds of the body on there. So the wounds in that body match the birthmarks on the little boy that remembered his previous lifetime. All over his chest there were these marks, which he couldn't explain. But now when they saw the previous wounds, they matched completely. The pattern was the same. So what was in the last life carried over into this life. Many examples. Here's no fingers. How do no fingers like that? It's not genetic. There's no genetic thing problem for that. But in the previous lifetime, this child remembered that they were playing on the farm and there was this farm utensil and they got all the fingers cut off, like that. So then they died from loss of blood. That's how they were born, no fingers, because that was the previous lifetime. Same with this man here, a child with no ear, born with no ear. One ear is it? No ear. Is that how is it possible? Huh? Plus he has a big mark up here on his head. So he remembers previous lifetime, was shot in the head with a gun, and his ear got blown off, and a big wound here. Then he died. This lifetime, no ear. So there's many examples of like this in his records. One child with no leg, previous lifetime, run over by a train, leg was cut off. This lifetime, no leg. So the previous experience carries over into the next body. So some sort of evidence also. Yeah. So the Journal of American Medical Association, which is very conservative, said, in regard to reincarnation, he has painstakingly and unemotionally collected a detailed series of cases from India. There's other cases also from Germany and other places. Cases in which the evidence is difficult to explain on any other grounds. He has placed on record a large amount of data that cannot be ignored. Some scientists are recognizing this as some sort of proof of soul. Near-death experience is another area. Due to the fact that doctors and nurses are there and we're observing the patients more, you keep records, etc. And then due to medical procedures, we can save people more, like with heart disease or whatever like that. The doctors and nurses and the patients also have some strange experiences. The patients would report that they had, brain stopped, heart stopped, maybe a few minutes. In some cases, maybe a whole day. They're dead. They come back to life suddenly. And it can't be explained scientifically because normally that can't happen. Your nerves cannot, your brain cannot revive after so many minutes. But somehow it happens anyway. But then the remarkable thing is that when they're dead, they have memories. How can your brain have memories when it's not functioning at all? Not only the memories, they had perceptions. They were seeing things. When you're dead and your eyes aren't operating, but they can see things. So scientists were a little bit puzzled by it. Of course, the patients are puzzled also. They didn't know what these experiences were. And they would speak to the doctors, and doctors didn't know what it was either. So some doctors got a little interested in this because they found that it was, not so rare. There was many cases like this where patients were reporting these strange experiences. So they began studying them. And then they discovered, very strangely, that even though the people came from all different backgrounds, educated, uneducated, professionals, laborers, different religions, etc., they had a common experience. One, they would go out of the body. They could actually observe themselves separating from their body. They would it's like they have an accident, lying on the road or something, and then they rise above their body and they can see their body lying on the road. Or if they had an operation and their heart stopped, then they could look at their heart, and the doctor's running around trying to revive the heart of it, and they're up there at the ceiling kind of looking down on everybody, as they're running around trying to revive them like that. So they get out of the body and they can observe their own body, and they can observe all the surroundings, etc. Very accurately, actually. So they separate from the body, and then they go through a tunnel. There's a long tunnel with a light at the end. It's going through this tunnel, and then they come out the other side, and they're in another world. Which is, where is that? It must be a subtle world of some sort. They're somewhere else. And they're feeling very ecstatic. There's no pain. They're feeling wonderful, free, etc. And they meet people, these spiritual beings. Sometimes they meet dead relatives who talk to them. They meet some spiritual being like an angel or whatever. And they see a review of their whole life. So these are some of the common experiences of all these different people. And then the people who were researching this, like Dr. Kenneth Ring, then they decided, well, these people believe there's no end of life, because they were kind of dead and then they were still conscious, and then they came back into their body. So then they think, well, I'm not the body at all. So these people actually had an experience, no, we're not the body, we're the soul, the eternal soul. And they were very convinced of this. And the thing is that when they do have this experience, after the experience, they generally change their life and become more spiritual as a result. So this is one evidence that this is not a hallucination. It's not due to drugs or to anesthesia or whatever like that. It's they're having a real experience which is valuable for them, and then they change their life for the better after that. So that based on that, they said these are not false experiences, because it's just hallucination. You don't really change. It's just some fake dream. You don't change. But people radically change their lives after these experiences. So then the researchers also got convinced. So they said, yeah, it must be a soul. So Dr. Rand Moody also, he said, for my near-death research and my personal experiences, death is, in my judgment, simply a transition to another kind of reality. So you don't really die at all. So you're something beyond the body. That's what these researchers have. These are doctors doing this research. So another type of evidence, indirect again, because depending on the testimony of people who have near-death experiences. So in Bhagavad Gita, in chapter 15, it says, whenever the soul accepts or leaves the body, it takes these senses with them in the subtle body, just as air takes fragrances from objects and goes elsewhere. So your subtle body leaves, and it leaves with your senses. So, of course, your body's here with your senses, but then your subtle body goes out with the senses. So you got another pair of senses here, not just these senses. So you can see with those eyes, and you can hear with those ears. So that's what these people going out of the body do. They're seeing something, but it's not with their eyes, because their eyes are down here on the road when they're having the accident. But they're looking from somewhere else, so they have some eyes also. So you have another set of eyes in your subtle body. So you have your gross body, and you have your subtle body, and you have the soul. So with that soul and the subtle body, then you can still perceive things beyond gross physical body and beyond your death. So that's how they can have these experiences. Soul plus subtle body beyond the gross body, which is dead and the brain is not operating anymore. So this is how we can explain that experience. So that subtle body is quite unique because it holds your desires, your impressions, your memories, and your karma, and your physical features. We see the example of memories from past lifetime coming into this lifetime. You have a traumatic event in the last life, like drowning or something. So in this lifetime, you don't like water. You have a fear of water or whatever like that. These memories may not come out in one lifetime. They may come out many lifetimes later. There is one woman who was a nurse in New York City, and that she had this peculiar problem that she could not stay in a room with all the doors and windows closed, ever. She would have to start opening the windows. So it's a little bit annoying for people, especially in the hospital. So she went to the doctors, like, what's wrong? Why I have this fear of closed doors and windows everywhere? So then he said, okay, you had an experience when you were a child, so you think about it, you think you're a child, you couldn't remember anything. So then he said, I'll put you under hypnosis, put her in hypnosis, and then he had her go from her birth upwards, remember all the incidents, but no memory of any, childhood incident about, trauma from closed doors and windows. The doctor was a little puzzled what to do now. So she was there in hypnosis, and then suddenly she began speaking, and she said, "Okay, now I'm in this cave. I'm in this this place here," and she began to describe all these strange things, that are happening. I'm rubbing this oil over this strange stone figure. It's got a cat head and a human body. So I guess. So she was describing this whole strange scenario, and then she described, well, now I'm getting sick, and all the people around me are also getting sick, and all these people are coming here to this place, and they're all these sick people, and then the healthy people are taking all the sick people, and they're taking us all up into the mountains, and then they find a cave, and they put us all in the cave, and then they take a rock. We're in the cave, and she's describing how she's sitting there in the cave, and they take this rock and they seal up the cave with the rock, and then it's all dark, and that's her. And she says, okay, it's all dark now. And then she says, well, look, no more, I can't breathe anymore because the oxygen runs out, like that. And then she said, well, I'll leave my body now. And then she goes out of the body like that. And the doctor was thinking, what's all this strange description? And he woke her up and sent her home. And then he was like, what is this strange memory she's having? And then he went to the library to look up hypnosis and previous memories and that. And then he discovered that, there's sometimes these people do have these strange recollections that look like from a previous lifetime or something like that. So then he called the woman back, and then she was quite happy. She said, my problem finished. I'm okay. I'm not afraid of the closed windows and doors anymore. And then he put her under hypnosis again. And then spontaneously she began to remember other lives. This first life was apparently like 3,000 or 4,000 years ago in Egypt, and she was a priestess in a temple. And then she was sealed up in the cave, and she got a paranoia of closed places because of that. So her memory was from like 3,000 years ago, and it surfaced in this lifetime. So that, how is it possible that memory continues? Because it's in the subtle body, and it goes from body to body to body to body. Anyway, she would have various recollections. One time she was in Greece, a few hundred and thousand years later, maybe in Greece or whatever. And then she was a student, a philosophy student. And then she recognized her teacher, the doctor, the psychiatrist was a philosophy teacher in Greece. One time she was a pirate. She was on a ship and the pirates attacked and she got her throat slit like that. So sometimes she had violent deaths also in other lives as well. But anyway, she had many, I think she recorded 20 lifetimes, so like 3,000 years or something. And so all of these things get carried with you, and then the memories may show up in any lifetime like that. And they do things to your behavior, unexplained behavior, because of that. So that's one thing that your subtle body does. Another is it carries over your features. We saw with the wounds in the body that transferred through the subtle body. The body gets affected, it gets impressed into the subtle body. Subtle body goes with the gross body. It has these no hand, no foot, no ear on it, and that gets stuck into your next body so that you don't develop a hand or a foot or ear or whatever, or you get wounds in your body because of that. So your features get determined also they get carried over. So we have some strange examples of features getting carried over. There is a firefighter in New York City, 1995, and then one day he was looking in a picture book of Civil War in America 100 years previously, and the figure looked very familiar. He said, there's my face there, and this general from 1860 looks like me. So he began investigating that general, and then he discovered that they were very similar in character
even the handwriting is very similar. And the events of their life are similar. When he got sick, then the general also got sick. You know, the patterns of the life were very similar also. Very, very strange. But then the funny thing was that the firefighter had a friend, this Zaleta, and then he was a friend, this Wilcox was the friend of the other person, 1860, and he also looked very similar. So it looked like both of them came together, two came together also. So this sometimes happened. People had some group karma before they appear later on in the same group also. So this is, but their faces were very similar to the previous 100 years ago with no genetic relationship at all. So the impressions were recorded in the subtle body and then they showed up again later on 100 years later in the gross body. Interesting. Yeah. So all of this is happening to the subtle body, and there was physical appearance the same, personality traits, writing style, karmic roots, past memories, all carried over to that subtle body. So the subtle body is material, and we can't see it. Science doesn't know about it, but it's very, very influential on us. It can do so many things to us. So the other thing that happens in the subtle body is the karma. This is where all your karma gets stored, and you can't get rid of it. It gets stuck in your subtle body, and your subtle body and your soul go together life after life, and they never separate as long as you're in the material world. So your karma goes with you all the way from lifetime to lifetime, along with your memories and all that. So karma is there, and you do one act of causing suffering, then you will get that suffering upon yourself in another lifetime. So it's inevitable. You cannot escape it because you cannot escape your subtle body. Subtle body will always be with you. Yeah? So these are some kind of indirect proofs of, the subtle body and soul existing through the investigation of memories of children and with the near-death experience. It's indirect proofs. So in the future, they're struggling to solve this problem of quantum physics and mechanics and the role of the observer, and consciousness exists, and some scientists say, okay, yes, there is conscious thing and consciousness is real. So some are coming to that conclusion. Others say, no, we can't accept it. That's not very scientific. So yeah, they're struggling with this at the moment, and they don't have an answer. But, I say some serious scientists are considering consciousness, the observer actually is real. So for us, of course, that when they talk about mind, this is as far as they go, we'll say soul. So the soul is real. This is the consciousness is a real thing. So in the future of science, as they go on, maybe they will accept Atma as a real entity and as integral to the body. They get that far eventually. But that's only one step. Now to get from Atman to God, that's a big step again. Just as it's very difficult to get from Atmagyan to Bhakti. Yes, we can accept soul, body, okay, fine. But to accept Supreme God, that's a little more difficult to accept that God has a form and he plays a flute. Very, very difficult to understand. He's blue or whatever color. Difficult for people to guess. So difficult to get from Atma, maybe they'll get to Atma, but to get to God, that's another thing. Or if they get to God, it will be this, like Einstein is kind of a pantheistic type of thing, like knowledge or whatever like that. But to say that God has a form and he's blue and he plays a flute, that's very, very difficult for science to conclude. You cannot do it for science. So they would just say, the observer, the perceiver, the knower or whatever, what we will call that the Atma. So the perceiver of everything. We say they talk about, I think, the universal field or something like that. They're trying to understand what that is now in science also. So we'll say the perceiver of everything would be God. We can perceive, the particle, the wave, and all this, and perceive individual things. But then we have someone to hold everything together and perceive everything. So that's Supreme Lord, the final perceiver, the ultimate perceiver of everything. So, of course, we have, the statements from the Upanishads, the tubers and the tree there. Basically, we say God is at the top, then we have the Atma, the Jivas, and we have matter, and then the Jivas and Maya, they're struggling with matter and trying to play around with matter, and then they get caught in this wheel of karma, are like us forever in ignorance. And on top we have Supreme Lord. So we can get out of that cycle by recognizing Supreme Lord. So as I said, to get to God as mere consciousness is not so difficult, and that's where some scientists are going to get that far. But do you accept God as a person full of love and bliss? That is much, maybe take a few thousand years for science to get that far. I don't know, maybe a few hundred years at least. As far as accepting, consciousness of soul, except, okay, maybe 20, 30 years down the line, science may generally accept it, but to get to God with a form, that's more difficult. That'll take hundreds of years down the road, perhaps. But anyway, at least some scientists are going in the right direction, I would say. If they take guidance from scripture, then they can probably advance in science more quickly. So that's also a hope. We can convince scientists to start reading Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavatam. Okay, Hare Krishna.
Questions? Very few questions, 4 to 5.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. So in Bhagavad Gita, Maharaj, we see that Prabhupada says that dimension of the soul, where Prabhupada gives 2 references from Rishis, 1/10,000 part of the tip of the hair. So I want to know, if we can measure neutrons, protons, and those things, such as small dimensions. So is there any possibility we can? Because you told that soul doesn't have mass. But if it has a dimension, then should have mass.
Well, this is actually a quote from the Upanishads, also in the Bhagavatam, it talks about the size of the soul. To say actually it's very small. Of course, the size is given 1/10,000th of the tip of the hair or whatever. That's not so small because now the electron microscope can photograph things much smaller than that. I think they can get down and photograph an atom or something. I don't know what they could do, or a molecule or whatever. Anything can get quite small, which is smaller than a 10,000th of the tip of the hair. So then they would say the soul is bigger than that. So, of course, we can say that it's somewhat metaphorical, that we can't take it literally, because the soul itself is spiritual, so how you can measure it, because you couldn't even see it anyway. And any instrument, you could not measure it with an instrument, because it's beyond instruments or whatever. So therefore, the idea of measuring the soul would also be difficult to do. First you can't see it, and then it's beyond physical measure. Of course, to understand that the soul is small or unknown in comparison to the Lord, who is bigger than the biggest. He's pervading everywhere. He's beyond all the universes and bigger than anything. But anyway, we can say that it's actually inconceivable for us to measure anything spiritual, whether it's the Atma or the Supreme Lord, because we have to use material measurements, and soul and God are beyond that. But as I said, the soul is small in comparison to the Lord.
Dream. So body will be lying on the bed.
Yeah.
And activity will be happening somewhere, so we can feel, we can experience. At that time, what is the position of the soul? The body or
When you're dreaming?
yeah.
Well, dream is a state in which your subtle body is also working, and your identity is a little different from this reality. So, and you have consciousness and you have awareness, but you're not actually using these senses or whatever like this anymore. It seems like you're doing something else. So you can say your subtle body and your subtle senses are operating at that time. Some people, if they carry out certain practices, then they can learn either in a half sleep state or whatever to actually
separate that subtle body from the gross body, and they have what we call astral travel, just like the yogis or whatever. So they can consciously do that, and then they can go and perceive things in other places and come back or whatever like that. And the experience is that it's funny because they said your eyes are three, like a spherical eye. I can see everywhere at once. So it's very difficult to orient yourself and travel around in that subtle body with a spherical eye because the dimensions are so weird. So you could try to block it out and just look in one direction at a time. So it's a very strange experience, they say, in that body. So, but you do have some vision of some sort, which is not like this eye. And you have other senses like hearing, etc. So it's all the subtle senses and the subtle what's going on in your body when you die, same thing. Yeah. So dream is kind of like that, but it's very uncontrolled and whatever. But when you get into the astral travel, it's a little more controlled.
Hare Krishna, Pranam Maharaj. It was a great talk. Maharaj, as you told, karma stays from subtle body, it transfers from one birth to another birth. As Maharaj, see, like, why only few people get this past life experience? And why only these few people, if suppose in past life some damage to their material body, they get some indication in this birth? Why only these few people, Maharaj?
I mean, memories of past life?
Yes, Maharaj.
Well, we don't really know. Sometimes it may be beneficial for a person to, just like some memories from your childhood may be beneficial for you. Others may not be, and therefore you may forget them. So we have what is called, due to trauma or something, that you often forget childhood memories because you don't like that experience, so then it's blocked out. And if you didn't block it out, it would disturb your life in the present time. So there's a kind of a psychological thing that blocks it out. So in general, you don't remember your previous life, because if you had to remember all your previous lifetimes in this lifetime, you couldn't live this lifetime. So you couldn't concentrate, so they're blocked out, so you can concentrate on this lifetime and make your decisions for this lifetime, not thinking last lifetime or previous lifetime. Even in this lifetime, we have a problem, because many people are just going into the past and living in the past. They're not living in the present, trying to make a future. They're living in the past in this life. So even that's a problem. But if you had your previous lifetimes to deal with, you'd be living in those, and you couldn't do anything in this lifetime. So therefore, all that's blocked out in general. But sometimes, as we see with this woman with their memory of can't stand closed windows and doors, it was getting a little problem for her. So by that previous memory, then she could cure herself. Right? So some of these uncontrollable things that may be causing problems for us, it may be beneficial to get the memory, then we can solve the problem. So sometimes they get memories for that purpose also. Usually the children that have memories, they forget them after a while. They surface for a while, and then when they grow up, they forget all about them again. So they surface for a little, and then they forget them also.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. So my question is not related to this topic, but some other. So Maharaj, few months back, one famous Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya, headline Sannyasi, he made a comment, open comment in an interview saying, Nagar Sankirtana, there are some crazy people from a well-known organization where all the boys and girls do crazy dance on the streets. So where is it mentioned in the Shastra that we have to do dance in the streets? He was saying. So he said, they are against it. So my question is, being the head of a bona fide Sampradaya, who is having a very deep knowledge in the Shastras and he made some Bhashyam and all, he has written. So he should be aware of it, right, as it is mentioned in the scripture. So how should we take it as it affects our faith in the practice, as a practicing devotees in the Shastras?
So he's saying Kirtan is not mentioned in scripture. I don't think he's very knowledgeable. In Sri Vaishnavism, if you look in the Alvars and the Divya Prabandha and all that, then you will find many verses that talk about wildly chanting, etc. So I don't think he has full knowledge of whoever this person is, because there's so many quotes for going mad after the Lord, chanting His name, etc.
Right, but his name is Chinnaji Swami. He's head of the whole South India.
Whatever, but I don't know. You could just take a copy, even in English or whatever, of Seshadripuram, you go through that, and you'll see so many verses. And I think there's some devotees that also done that. They're taking these verses out, so they're there, definitely.
Right, yeah.
But you can take Ando. Ando, you know Ando? Very famous. She's like, so she's written all these songs about Krishna. And, you know, Krishna in Vrindavan. Very, very, you know, devotional songs about Krishna and how to serve Krishna very nicely. So, I don't think he's speaking accurately.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you for a very nice session. As we are discussing about subtle body, in Kapila Shiksha, Lord Kapila says, Jarayati Ashya Kosha, Anilo Nigarnoyata, that bhakti dissolves subtle body. And even Rupa Goswami says, Iha Asya Hare by dedicating mind, body, words, and service of the Lord. Even in this life, we can become liberated. That means even within this body, I can stay with subtle body completely dissolved. The body is working simply with the soul. Just my question.
Well, when we talk about dissolving your subtle body, ultimately, of course, to go to the spiritual world, you cannot have a gross body or a subtle body. When you die, you get rid of your gross body, but your subtle body goes with you. So if you want liberation, then you have to dissolve your subtle body also. So that through bhakti you can do that. But of course, we're not only interested in doing that, but we want to develop spiritual body as well. But anyway, when you're in this body, and you are Jivan Mukta or whatever, then you have the body, and you'll still maintain a subtle body also, because you do have to maintain this body. So the subtle body is also important for maintaining the gross body. So if you're Jivan Mukta, you have to maintain the body, so therefore the subtle body will remain at that time. But it is destroyed in the sense it no longer has the impressions, the karmas, desires, and all this stuff that's held in the subtle body that's causing us rebirth. This is free of that, so therefore there's no problem for that subtle body. It's not pushing you into another body.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Maharaj, my question is with respect to yesterday morning's class, when you explained about the different stars, planets, how they influence. So my question was that, can astrology be used to see a person who can be favorable to take to Krishna conscious and practice it?
Bhakti cannot be predicted by astrology because it's non-material. And astrology is predicting karma, which is material. So basically, you cannot predict bhakti or what happens to devotees in that sense. However, the devotees do have material bodies. And as long as they live, they do have material bodies. And even if their karmas are all destroyed, a shadow of karma will also remain, which means a pattern of karma will remain. So you can somewhat predict some of the patterns of karma, even for devotees destroyed all this karma. Some devotees may have not destroyed all the karmas also, because if you've done previous aparadhas, those the destruction of karmas is not full, as in Hajimel's case, everything went immediately. But if you have aparadhas, more gradual process. Some karmas get destroyed, other karmas remain. So, therefore, there may be traces of karmas for people, or even if it's gone, there's shadow of karma for another person. So somewhat karma can be predictable by astrology. That's the best bad karmas. In case of favorability for bhakti or how they become devotional again, ultimately that is up to something beyond matter. That is mercy of the devotees and mercy of Krishna. So that's not predictable by astrology at all. All the astrology can predict is that if he becomes a devotee, would his anarthas be more or less? Some people have more anarthas, more problematic anarthas due to their vasanas or whatever. Others may have less, in spite of the fact that they're doing devotion. They come with loads of karma, etc. So some people are more favorable to begin with, some are maybe more difficult for them. That's all. So you can predict their anarthas.
So how is it that we can tell the influence of the stars with respect to the innate qualities of the soul? Because
You can. No, innate qualities, so you cannot.
No, you can only discuss their due to karma, what type of mind you got, your gunas from that. That's
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you for your blessings. Soul carries the senses of previous lives, right? So while dreaming, can we say that we are getting the dreams of previous lives?
There may be cases where you do get a dream, an experience of a previous lifetime, or you may get a future lifetime, one or the other. You could, but it's also very difficult to verify either of them. We don't know. Some may just be imagination or what. Some may be difficult to verify it, but you could definitely get something. And of course, it may not just be a dream. In actual waking life, you could get memories also of a previous lifetime. Possible.
And my second question is, God is trying to tell that we should not try to identify this body. But we are wearing tilak, right? But which means we are trying to identify with this body. God is trying to tell us that we should not try to identify a soul with this body.
Yeah.
But we are wearing tilak and all, which means we are
wearing tilak.
identifying with body. Okay.
Yeah. So when we wear tilak, we're identifying ourselves as a devotee of the Lord. So that type of identity, I am the servant of Krishna, that's a good identity. It's not exactly the material body, we're identifying ourselves as the servant of Krishna, which is eternal. So that we're using material things, we're not trying to attach ourselves to the material body through this. We're just trying to remind ourselves that we're the eternal servant of Krishna. So that's the identity of the soul. And then, of course, we do have a body, but then we also engage the body in Krishna's service.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. In human form has a higher intelligence, and as we do the action in our present life, we get another life. If we compare to animals, they have got certain qualities comparing to human form. Certain animals are wild and some are very soft, and they are also consume only vegetarian food. Some, whereas being a higher intelligence, human form, they consume all sort of non-veg and other foods, not as per. So how do we compare? And like monkeys and dogs, we see some monkeys are very soft and some are very wild. So how does it differentiate these things?
Why the animals are different?
No, is it for their previous action and how they concentrate?
Well, animals, they don't produce karma. Yeah, in other words, the dog barks and bites and whatever, or eats all sorts of crazy food. He doesn't get karma for that because he hasn't got higher intelligence. Just like children don't get karma because they can't think properly. Adults get karma. So in that sense, no karma. But the dogs and whatever, they do have karmas from being a human being. So they all get stuck with karmas from previous, or so many lifetimes in the past. So that dog may have a karma of, because he's a human being, and maybe he killed 5 cows and 20 deer and 5 pigs or whatever, so that he suffers as a dog, and he becomes a dog. That's one of his suffering. And as a dog, if he's done a lot of killing, then he may be a dog that's starving all the time, or a dog that gets his, has an accident on the street that gets his leg damaged or whatever like that. So that's because of his actions as a human being that he gets some bad karma as a dog.
Compared to human form, those who are eating non-veg food and other, they are in a better position who are vegetarian, animals.
What is that?
If a human form being a higher intelligence,
Yes.
they are eating all sort of non-veg food, etc., not as per scripture. And whereas the animals, they are having only vegetarian food. So their position is better than human form or how is it?
The human form may have a choice. We can do either. The animals really don't have choice. Some animals are all vegetarian, some are all mixed, and some are all what we call carnivorous or whatever like that. But in any case, they don't even get any karma for that. There's no choice. A human being, we do have a choice. And we should make the right choice.
Karma is different, but they are in a good position. They are better.
Better be an animal. Well, you better be an animal, then you don't have to choose, and you don't get any karma. That's one thing. But the thing is, then you're trapped down there and you can't get out of that position. So as a human being, you have choice, and you can make all wrong choices, and then you can go downwards. Good choices, and you can get up. Animal doesn't have that choice. So that's the human being. We have greater responsibility now that we get higher intelligence and free will. Animals don't have that responsibility. So in that sense, okay, we don't want responsibility, we can be free. So people can be like that also. Everyone can say, I'll go to jail. They'll feed me, whatever like that. I don't have to take care of my family. I just sit in the jail. No free will, but I get my food every day, and I can live my 50 years, 100 years, and the doctor takes care of me when I get sick. I don't have to pay the bills. If you want, you can live like that. Or then you can also say, no, I don't like to be in jail, even if I have the responsibility of working and doing that, because I like my freedom. So that's the human being. You can choose one or the other. If he wants to choose that, then he becomes animal.
Last question.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, the session was amazing. So my doubt is, in Chinese tradition, there is something known as Shi, like C-H-I. So what exactly is this, and how does that influence the power of the mind?
So that's something like prana. And prana, of course, is material. But of course, it's very important for the functioning of your body. That your pranas are operating properly like that. So the chi also is of that sort of thing. They don't really define it the same way, but we can say it's something of the same nature. That's your energy, and how you move your energy in your body. And it can get blocked up, and then in case you get sick, or if it's operating properly, then you have lots of energy, whatever like that. And then accordingly, you can also use that energy in certain ways, and that's what the martial artists do. The Qigong masters and the Kung Fu, whatever like that. If they're expert, then they use that Qi in their fighting also, so they can direct that Qi into their arms or whatever like that. And then use it for fighting skills or whatever. So it's energy of the body, and because it's subtle material, it can act in very different ways from normal physical, effort like that. So therefore, you get extra powers by using that chi properly. Therefore, those martial artists get, you can do remarkable things also.
Thank you, Maharaj. And one more thing. It is told that we have to follow in the footsteps of great souls and pure devotees, but we should not imitate them. So what is this distinguishment, and how do we change from imitating to actually following in their footsteps?
Yeah, so we sometimes the great devotees like Shiva or Krishna do things, and if we imitate them, then we break the laws of Dharma. So then we can't do that. Or we do things which are very dangerous for us. Shiva drinks poison, so we can't drink poison because we'll die. Shiva won't die. Like that. So certain things that superhuman people and God can do, we definitely cannot imitate that and get away with it. Yeah? But at least we follow what they tell us. So we can always follow those instructions because their instructions are always perfect. Sometimes we can also follow them. So Krishna himself says, I follow all the rules of Dharma, so people will follow. So we keep following, and we follow because he follows. So in that sense, we can also follow. But then other things he will do, which are exceptional, so we can't follow that because it's his prerogative to do that, but not ours.
Hare Krishna, thank you very much for listening and asking wonderful questions. So now we have a special book by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and Bhaktivinoda Thakur. This contains 3 important books. It's a gist of books, and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur contains 3 books. So all to 6 books you can take from Maharaj's hand. Very, very useful. Description about Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavatam, and Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu and Bhushori Namati. So just have 200 rupees. You can pay in the counter later. If you want, you can take from Maharaj's hand. Anyone wants? Come, please. So there are a few sets. It's very useful. It gives the gist where you can get the real knowledge. We can encourage by Hare Krishna mantra. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna.